Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. We are really, really happy to have you join us again for another episode of the Software Delivery Leadership Forum. It's a safe space to talk about software delivery, and it's an open, online, and interactive discussion on topics related to Agile, DevOps, and continuous delivery. I'm Sam Fell. Slide.
And I'm Anders Wahlgren. Today's topic is called Embrace, Don't Replace Enterprise DevOps Realities. DevOps in the enterprise can include everything from mainframe to cloud native, monolith to microservices, everything in between. And this reality means you can't simply rip and replace as much as we'd like to do that. Systems that stick around for a long time tend to stick around for a reason, not just because you want to replace them. That doesn't make it easy. So you must embrace choice across teams, tools, and technologies to unlock innovation safely. So join us or stick around to discuss empowering teams through choice, standardization and flexibility and how they relate, and also governance around tool experimentation and onboarding. So we have a great show for you today, hopefully. Stick around.
Wonderful. All right, next slide, please. And to talk about this topic, we have some pretty impressive horsepower speaking and on the panel. I'm going to ask Sean Ahmed, our GM, SVP of SDA Solutions at CloudBees, to give a little introduction on himself. And then we will be introducing the rest of the panelists towards the 30-minute mark of the presentation. Sean's going to go through some very interesting information, subject matter information up front, and then we're going to open it up to the rest of the panelists. So Sean, welcome. Thank you for being here. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. And I'm super excited about doing this panel. It's one of those rare times where I get to take off my CloudBees hat and then I get to just talk about experiences and things that I've done well or not so well in the past, and be able to talk a little bit about those learnings. And that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to take off my CloudBees hat and I'm going to talk a little bit about those experiences. So super excited about that. And most of the talk today is going to be focused around me as one of the experiences I had leading a software delivery organization, and some of the challenges I went through and learnings I went through from that experience. And so most of the slides are geared to talk about that. And so hopefully I hit the mark and we all collectively learn along the process.
Awesome. And so to those of you who are coming in and missed part of the opening, I apologize. I'm really eager to get us started. The good news is this is all being recorded. We are looking at your messages. We're looking at your texts and your chats. If you can go to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about some of the rules of engagement here. So the Software Delivery Leadership Forum is meant to be a two-way conversation. We really would love to have your questions in the Q&A. We chose this platform specifically because your questions can be seen by other members of the audience, and you're able to look at them and understand which ones are good or not. You can answer back on them. We really want to make this a two-way conversation. If you have things that you want to be addressed by the panel, then you can put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we can take a look at those. I'm going to be trying to surface those questions during the second part of our program today. So keep the conversation flowing. Make sure you're asking your questions. This is a safe space for you to ask any kind of question, even if it seems like an easy one. There will likely be somebody who's going to appreciate getting that answer as well. So, you know, be engaged, be respectful. Your comments can be seen by everybody, and we will dismiss you if you're not being respectful. And with that, I'm going to ask to hand this over to our featured speaker. Sean, take it away.
All right. Well, thanks, Sam. And today I'm going to specifically talk about my experience scaling a software delivery organization consisting of about 150 developers at the end of it. And particularly in this example, and I'm going to be talking quite a bit about how I scaled that organization from an initial 10, 15 developers and got to that number, and some of the challenges I saw on that path. Specifically, it's important context here also. I was in a very sort of highly regulated industries At the time, we were a shop building software for banks, commercial banks, and for telco and for healthcare and that type of industries, which meant that we had a lot of requirements from our customers when we were building the software that meant we had to govern our process quite a bit. And we found that not to be as easy as we had thought when we first set out building some of these prototypes of these applications in this design and application development studio that we had started. So that is the context for the presentation and the learnings. And with that, sit back, relax, enjoy your coffee or beverage of choice. Hopefully it's a good one, and we won't get into what that might be or how that mixture has been put together, but enjoy. All right. As a leader of this organization, when we first started out this company, I had three really important parts that I needed to, as a leader of the software delivery organization, focus on. I had multiple teams working with multiple clients at the same time, which meant that they were building very different applications. They had very different environments. They had very different processes and tools that they were using. And trying to get them all to work in harmony so that all these developers could share these best practices with each other for how to get innovation to market was a really, really important task of mine that I had to look after every single day. I also learned very early on that my developers and generally also all engineers from ops to the development side, they all had very specific and clear choices that they had with regards to how they do their job, how they perform their day-to-day. In time, I got to know it as the suite setup. Each developer had their, or HR person had their suite setup of tools and things they like to use in order to do their jobs. And it was critically important for me to ensure that they have that choice. And last but not least, I'm not the only person managing the organization. There's the business side, there's sales, there was users, customers at the end of this. And along the process, I really also realized that in today's world, look, software delivery is one larger, but one component of many in being successful with software that you're releasing and delivering to market. There are people that have to service it. There are people that are going to use it. There's going to be management who wants to know how they should be supporting it and how do we control it and make sure that it is as safe as possible. So these were sort of my, as a software leader, day to day, I have to manage to these three very, very important points. On the other hand, though, when I talked to the business leaders, the customers and the customer CEO for whom we were building these software and launching and releasing them in market, they would tell us our key drivers is a little different than your key drivers, Sean. Our key drivers for the business is always that we have to drive innovation quickly, because the truth of the matter is the world is highly competitive around us. Every business, traditional software, hardware service, car manufacturer or banking service, whatever it is that we're delivering is just becoming all software driven moving forward. The market would call it digital transformation. And I think what they've all meant by that was just that we're going to deliver whatever we were delivering sort of manually before. We have to deliver that experience and product now digitally or through software. So that meant that I had to continually think about what they wanted, and they would say, we need you to deliver fast, but we also need you to reduce the risk associated with delivering said features or products into market. And that means that I had to continuously optimize that process and that delivery throughout and make it safe for the end user. So these were sort of the drivers that the business side of our customers would tell us is most important to them. But the challenge for me is when I would go back and I would look at the organization and I would say, hey, how does my organization's software delivery process look like? It wouldn't be too far away from this sort of two-dimensional process. And just when I thought I had it right, it looks precisely like this two-dimensional model here. And I would think, okay, I now understand exactly what tools and what processes are being used here with this team, and then what that team is using, and so on and so forth. Just when I thought I had a handle on it, I'd realized very quickly, as I started scaling my organization from 10 developers to 20 and 30 and 40, this wasn't a two-dimensional process. It had 3 dimensions to it. Every team didn't necessarily use the same tool for every application. Not every team would use the same environment to which they were releasing. Some were on AWS. Other customers were entirely self-managed on-premise. Others were using GCP. The applications were different. So the tools they required were very different. So it wasn't just that you had one team with one tool. You had one team with multiple tools and multiple processes and multiple delivery environments for the different types of applications that they were building. So when a problem goes from being two-dimensional that you can put in a graph to three-dimensional cube orientation, like this slide is trying to show, it becomes very, very difficult to manage the organization, because you find yourself in this dilemma of what I ended up calling my physics dilemma. This is, as the graph of number of teams and the number of applications and the number of target environments, tools, and the associated process with them increases and goes up, the physics of this is that the opposite happens with the visibility. I could not at all get any view into what my morning was going to look like, the day was going to look like, which teams were performing really well, which ones were not performing so well. How do I help them do their retrospectives the best possible way? How do I find where value is getting stuck, and how do I unlock it? Which resulted in me coming into the office very often, like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, spending 3 hours in multiple tools, just gathering information to get the visibility to run my day in a reasonable manner, starting at 8 o'clock when my dev teams come in and we have stand-ups, and I want to be as helpful as I can to the developers. And that wasn't just my problem as well. Turns out my development organization, my ops folks, were sort of doing some of the similar things, digging to their tools and processes to figure out how things had gone the day before, the week, or what delivery they had to do, which meant that control was very distributed across multiple different places of the various processes, and they were disjointed. And then, especially in my customers that were in financial services, clearly we had to govern the process, you know, for audit reason, for risk reasons, and so on and so forth, because if you released something into the market and it had some implication for users in a negative way, you could get audited by the government in ways that banks and telcos and healthcare don't want to get audited. And that totally meant that if I can't go back, and if I can't figure out very quickly a traceable sort of route back to the source of where problems may have been introduced into code, or problems might have been introduced into a release or a pipeline or wherever it might have occurred, I was going to be in trouble. And all these 3 things meant that the physics of speed of innovation is completely out the window. If you're a manual shop like we were originally, that made it incredibly difficult. So for us, this real set of realization led us to, after roughly about hitting 60 or so, 60, 65 developers or so, 2-3 years into our course of building this business, that we had to change. We had to build a software delivery backbone. We couldn't sit there with script coding every single part of this process when we know that it's not as two-dimensional as we would want it to be. It's truly 3 dimensions. We had to figure out how to deal with that.
So Sean, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second and just ask the audience. I'm seeing a lot of great folks. We got people from all over the country, in fact, all over the world joining us. So it's great to have them here. But I would love to get in the chat there if there's any reaction to this chart. It pretty succinctly lays out some of the problems. You know, you've heard of the mythical man month, right? If you just throw more people at a project, does it make it go faster? And sometimes the answer, well, most of the time the answer is no. Right, the complexity that is definitely problematic. So put it in the chat if this is something that you're experiencing, that you have experienced. This is a universal problem, Jerry's saying. Yeah, there's a lot of people that are agreeing with this. So I think you're definitely speaking the right language here, Sean.
Okay. Well, at least I'm not the only one that was in this set of problems. So that makes me at least feel a little bit better. But there are ways that we dealt with that. And I think the first way that we dealt with it was probably the worst way we could have possibly have dealt with it. I would say probably a bit part or arrogance on my part as the leader of the organization. Um, I nailed it down to saying my problem, your problem, and the whole organization problems is disconnections. And so it was very, very clear that my processes were disconnected from each other. My teams were disconnected. My teams were disconnected not just among ourselves, but up with their management chain, but also more importantly than the management chain, actually, to the customer, right? Disconnected from the customers. And so we needed to fix this problem of process tool disconnection. And there was various levels to do that. We thought about data as a layer, and we said the data needs to be connected. We need to be able to have policies and rules that we put together to connect our processes so that we can put the checks and balances in the right place. We need to implement continuous integration. We need to have that so that we don't do these monolithic, these really large, big releases. We need to be able to get smaller pieces of features, capabilities. We need to separate them from the deployment. We need to be at so many things we need to get done. And then as we were realizing we've got more than one application, as soon as we ended up having 2-3 different applications, we're realizing deployment is easy. Release is not. And release was tough, and a lot of people get involved. A lot of governance needs to go into releasing software. So the arrogance, where did that come part? The arrogance really came part in my first set of solution, and that was to tell everybody your freedom of all these tools are now gone. I'm going to put you into a box.
You sounded like a real jerk, man.
Yeah, I have to admit, I was very much a jerk in this endeavor. And the first step I took was to put people in a box. And I took some tools away and I said, you know, any tool that isn't necessary, not needed, you know, perceived by me, right? Not perceived by my teams, but perceived by me as costing more, adding more problems, and so on and so forth. Take it away. We're going to put it in a box. We got a off-the-shelf solution. I call it a solution, but a set of applications rather, from one vendor, and the vendor was more sort of like an all-in-one vendor that provided source control management, CI/CD, all kinds of features along the way. And so we decided that, or I decided, I should say rather, we're going to put everybody in that box, and we're going to have everybody just use one backend system so that all data, tools, and processes were within one singular dimension and was connected by way of this sort of box. The inverse of putting people in the box, though, was that I also put a lock around it, which meant that there was all these amazing open source solutions, off-the-shelf, productized commercial solutions, and so on and so forth, that were their choices we were taking away. And you kind of get this problem where my whole organization, I think at this point in time, we were probably more like 80, 90 people developing multitude of teams, that they were sitting inside the box looking out and saying, gosh, we're being forced to do things by Sean in a very specific way with a very specific set of tools so that Sean feels like the process is connected, the data is connected. And by God, during the time I had this product or this solution, this backbone, a single system, you know, yes, it was good. You know, I was getting a lot more visibility. I was getting a lot more governance because it was all connected, and it makes sense. But I had super unhappy developers. I had super unhappy ops folks. I had super unhappy managers who were looking at the outside world and the wonderful products and tools and solutions that are out there that they could use to do their job better, and they were not getting to use them because I would always ask the question, well, you know, why do you need this? Can't you just get that from the quote unquote box? And more often than not, I would get the answer, yeah, you can, but the anti-pattern here is that whatever's in the box only gets us so far. It's not as fully fledged as that expert company out there that has built this specialized tool to do this job, which if I could use it, Sean, would make me do my job, you know, orders of magnitude better. And so I'm not getting to use that. And so there's all this great technology out there, which meant to me that, yeah, I am essentially, on one hand, I've gotten some advantages of putting a box in place, but the biggest disadvantage is all the people that I put in the box are so unhappy they don't want to be in there. So what good then is the box for me? If they have to be in there and they're not doing the best work, then this is not about them. It has increasingly become about me, and it's become about my problems. And so the problem transitioned from there into going, okay, is there or a way in which this world can exist where I can have best of both worlds? That meant first and foremost that I have to give freedom back and unshackle my developers and ops folks and so on and so forth, and give them freedom. And what I learned, obviously through this entire process, is that freedom to them meant choice. And that's what freedom really truly meant to them. This isn't some sort of political, concept of freedom or social, concept of freedom. This is freedom at work and to develop and do your job freedom. And that meant choice. So I learned that very quickly. And choice is what gave them the greatest focus on flow. And that's when I came to appreciate the most about my learnings, was that is the sweet setup. It's that focus and flow that comes with being able to choose the tools that you require to set your suite setup up. That meant it's going to be more tough for me as the person managing the process, but it's going to be 10 times better for those who have to build the innovation. So if I can give them that focus and flow, it's not very dissimilar from this experience I always had every time I had ever bought a new laptop. And the first thing I did, and I do it periodically, is you get a new laptop, you just want to get your mail set up right. You have your choice of mail client you want. Some people like Google Slides, other people hate it and just want to use PowerPoint, and because that's limiting to them. And I know if I ever use Apple's Keynote product, it is so limiting that I don't know who it was made for to begin with. So I wanted my PowerPoint, but then if you convert over from PowerPoint into Google Slide, things get crappy and they don't look the same, and the animations don't work right. And so you do all this extra, like, silly work that take up all your time, manual rote tasks to convert, and things get disconnected. And it hits you, even if you're not sitting there writing code every day, that the suite setup a business person has is the same suite setup that a developer and an ops person wants or needs to have in order to do their job. So that meant just, Sean, you just gotta suck it up and embrace it. You gotta embrace that developer freedom. You gotta embrace that tool process freedom, and stop thinking about replacing it, because it just doesn't work. You don't get the best work out of the people that you want when they don't have their suite set up. That focus and flow that comes with choice. So that's the big learning, which meant to me that I had to rethink what modern software delivery would mean to me and our organization. There were 5 pillars upon which we had started building, that we thought, these 5 things are really, really important to us as an organization. Those are represented here in this graph or not graph, but gears instead. And as a company, or as a software delivery organization, we only achieved 3 of them. Had we existed for a longer period of time, then I am fairly certain that the 2 gears all the way over to the right would have been our next focus area. But we definitely realized that these gears, they have to exist above the tool stack. Multiple tools, multiple stacks, they have to exist and support all of them. These pillars have to support multiple process. They have to support multiple teams in the way that they do their work. And many times you cannot do any of this without considering the type of applications they're building, where they're being released. And so the first thing we did as a company, and I think this is the only reference I'll make to product names in here, is Jenkins. We picked open source Jenkins as the first sort of tool to start building our continuous integration and continuous delivery pipeline. We started on premise with that, but very quickly realized that we had multiple stacks to which we were releasing software for different clients. And that meant that we needed to deliver the software and the processes. Each one of those organizations we were doing business with went through, required us to be far more, I would say, governed, if you need, that's probably the best word to say, in how we release software to them. And each one of those processes were so different and complex that simply we needed a lot more out of the CD part of it. So we introduced release orchestration, and we at that time picked to test a product called Flow from Electric Cloud that we used to sort of build those delivery pipelines for the software. That helped us become orders of magnitude better as we started building our backbone for how we build and deliver software. Another learning we also had, though, was while we had solved the continuous integration and CD problem and release orchestration problem, we realized that the rapid pace with which we were delivering features, or building them, I should say, rather, we weren't releasing them at the same rapid pace to customers. And we weren't getting them tested as much with end users to get early feedback loops going. So we started thinking about what it would meant if we managed our software more through the lens and optics of managing features so that we could get them out into production environment, but experiment with those features more easily in production so that we could get user. And it sounded horrific at the time. It sounded like a surefire way of failing to put, unfinished features out there. But with time, we learned of a number of vendors that provided, feature management, experimentation specific products that we could have used so that we could sort of decouple the release of features from the actual deployments itself in such a way that we could turn them on, off, and test and try so we could get those feedback loops going. So that would definitely have been the next arena we would have ventured into. And then you have value stream management, which became sort of the more critical component of what I had viewed as a leader would be my way of then managing and getting all the benefits of the box that I wanted, visibility and control and governance and so on, but also be able to take that out of that box and then set it on top of the existing processing and connect them. And to me, a very strong value stream management product or solution, if you will, it would likely be the next step so that we could live in both worlds of choice.
We had
control.
I'm sorry. So we had a question from Santi Kumar. He said, just at the highest level, what is value stream management? So can you give us a 30,000 foot, what is value stream management, Sean?
Yeah, absolutely. To me, the value stream management meant that I could see an idea captured in, say, Confluence or Jira as an example, as a ticket. Could be a user story. It could be something somebody decided, or it could be we were using another product to get tickets in from customer for feature requests. And it would be something like being able to get a feature request and then be able to see the journey in every step that unit of work or feature takes throughout from a very early idea stage all the way to production, and be able to see each step it goes through. So to us, that meant we were collecting data from research products. We could attach Word documents, we could attach early research information and be able to see it, then see the step where it starts being coded, meaning being able to associate who is the developer on that feature, who is the PM on that feature, who is the customer who requested the feature, being able to see sort of that turn into a set of Jira tickets that started the planning phase of how we're going to develop it, to seeing the actual pipelines and workloads associated with it that is testing and so on and so forth, and see how often it's being tested, how often the code's being checked in, what was the latest pull request, what was the result of that, did the build fail, did it work right, when is it deployed, and then taking it further out to the right, it would be the idea, where did we deploy it, which customers got to test it, which environments is it living in, and what is the associated sort of usage. So some of the telemetry associated with what we had released. We had no way of seeing that left to right. But what the modern promise of value stream management really is being able to pull all of that data set together and show the process connected left to right, so you can follow and see each one of these features or deployments of code left to right, and being able to pinpoint with accuracy sort of where that value is stuck. That kind of view is what, to me, value stream management is about.
Wonderful. Thank you. That helps. Hopefully it sounds like, Kumar, that was helpful for you as well. Very
Sam,
good.
how am I doing on time? I forgot to start my timer, but I think I'm at the mark where I need to end. So I've only have one slide.
Yeah,
left.
you're perfect.
Right.
You're landing this plane, man. This is perfect.
Right. So I think when we started building, these key practices within our organization, CI, CD, and release orchestration, those three, when we built those to support freedom of choice, is when we transformed our organization. That is when the drumbeat went from we're disconnected to together we can. And that was really exciting. Obviously a very humbling experience for me to have gone through, as my approach really was very arrogant to how to solve this problem to begin with, and very contradictory to my own teams. But I do think that when I got to the other side of that, the tune of that changed it, and it became a message of together we can. And the question is, together you can what? Well, together as an organization is when we first then were able to drive innovation truly quickly to market. We were releasing faster than we had ever done before with incremental new innovation. And that was super exciting to our customers, but more importantly, it was also super exciting to our development organization as well, being able to see their work get into the hands of customers faster, get feedback loops earlier on the things that we're developing, what's being used, what's being successful, what's not, and then being able to go back and optimize that development process to improve the feature or improve the product, or incrementally come up with some new ideas for features that we should be building based on the success or not so much the success of another feature. That optimized our development process quite a bit. The connections, and this is probably like the most nuanced piece of information I will share with you today, but probably one of the most powerful outcomes I saw is when these things were connected, but the developers also had choice. It led to a common sort of, I should say, dictionary of terms and how they communicate with each other and how they work with each other that got orders of magnitude improved. Because everybody was so well connected at a data and tool layer, everybody talked about a release in the same way. Everybody talked about a feature by its name in the same way. Everybody who was adding a feature to a release knew which developers had created it, could automate and send notifications, say, hey, your feature is going to be in this release. This is what that means for you. And keep an eye on it or test. Make sure that you look at the instrumentation dashboard to see how it's getting picked up and being used. And it was just an overall improvement that was really, really amazing for our customers. Not our customers, but the customers, like the bank. They saw this as massive reduction in risk. And what better way to think about success than the fact that after we as a company got acquired, I remember asking the CTO of the company who acquired us, why did you acquire us? And do you really like our application so much? And I remember his answer so clearly. He said, your applications are meh, but, but your development process is really good. And I really would want to infect my development organization with a lot of the practices you guys have built. And that's a large part of why I felt like acquiring you would be a good thing for us. So that's where that story ends. If you take away nothing from this, well, first, don't take away the fact that we got acquired. That's a side story. But do take away the fact that together you can as well. And that together, doing things together means freedom and choice together with a backbone, it not replacing it. And that's how our story goes. So with that, I am going to end it, and I'm going to take it to the panel discussion and hand it to Anders and Sam.
Awesome. Thank you. Awesome content. Really, really engaging. A lot of fantastic comments and questions and observations in the chat. We do have one question in the Q&A. So now is a great time. I asked earlier if folks would add in a line or two in the chat to the group to say where you're from. We love to hear that. We've got folks from all over the United States and in Canada, got folks from Europe. So, and we're actually holding the same topic in a European friendly time zone on the 28th. So it's at 2:30 Central European time for those of you who are listening and want to do this again. But put your questions in. Brazil is there. Wow, that's great. Really good to see so many folks showing up. A lot of great comments and questions. I'm not sure if folks can see when questions are coming into us in the chat. And this is a question maybe for Max. Plain old Virginia. Come on, Nana. There's nothing plain about old Virginia. That's great. Thanks. Nice to have you here. So I'm not sure if everyone can see that, or it looks like it's just going to the panelists. So maybe the folks can't see what's being asked, just what I'm answering. So that might be something for us to improve next time.
Everyone can see.
Everyone can see all the, okay, wonderful. All right, great. Okay, so the next part of this is really, if I could have all the different panelists to light up their cameras. You know, our perspective is interesting. The community's perspective is really what we're trying to get out of it. Hopefully you're seeing that we're really eager to get your feedback and your input. We're also really eager to get input from outside of our four walls. And so we've got a fantastic panel of folks who are going to be joining us to talk through some of these topics. I'm going to start by having them introduce themselves. And I'm going to start, if you'll go to the next slide, please, Sean. And then, yep. Let's go ahead and build. Thank you. And I'm going to ask Stephen to introduce himself, if he would.
Great. Thanks, Sam. Hello, everybody. My name's Steve Weinstein. I'm Senior Vice President in Technology Solution and Services at Broadridge here in Long Island, New York. I've been with the firm now for about 5 years, currently responsible for the DevOps Center of Excellence, a technology service delivery function, solution architecture for our distributed and cloud applications, and our project management office. Recently, I added a responsibility to take over the quality management function for a large wealth management client engagement. I am accountable for functional testing, non-functional testing, as well as creation of automated regression testbacks for post-change validation. I spent 15 years at JPMorgan Chase prior to Broadridge in various software development, deployment, and quality engineering roles. And I look forward to the panel discussion today, and it's great to be here.
Lovely. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a question already queued up for you with your name on it from Alan about quality assurance. So it's right in your wheelhouse.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and so thank you for joining us. So James Loop, unfortunately, was not able to join us today. So we're sad not to have our friend from AWS joining. Obviously, they've probably seen a whole lot of old stuff trying to be mashed together with some new stuff. So they probably know a thing or two about this. So we're sorry he's not here. Mitch, introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Sam. Happy to be here. My name is Mitch Ashley. I'm CEO and Managing Analyst with Accelerated Strategies Group. We focus on digital transformation, DevOps, cloud native, and cybersecurity. So I've also been on the CIO side of things. So I appreciate Sean's story very much. Some shared experiences there. Happy to be on the panel. Thanks for having me.
Lovely. Thank you. Sam Knutson, new face on the panel. We're really happy to see you here as well. Introduce yourself, please, to the folks.
I lead product for CompuWare, and I've been with the company for about 5.5 years. We enable Agile and DevOps on the IBM ZOS mainframe platform, and I've been working in or around that platform in one capacity or another for over 3 decades.
Very nice. Elephants can dance. We know that that's true. Awesome. Thank you for joining us. Tracy Miranda, introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everybody. I'm Tracy Miranda. I'm the Director of Open Source Community here at CloudBees, which means I get to work with the Jenkins and Jenkins X communities. And I'm also on the governing board for the Continuous Delivery Foundation, And for those not familiar with that, it's an open source foundation with the mission to improve the world's capacity to deliver software with security and speed. And on that board, we have a number of companies, folks like Salesforce and Netflix and Google. So happy to bring that perspective here. And in case it hasn't come across, I'm a big fan of open source. So happy to speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, CloudBees in general, we're very big into open source. There's so many great solutions out there to help solve a lot of these problems. Let's go to the next slide and let's start talking about some of the issues and challenges that larger companies face. Stephen, you know, you were just talking about the role that you have at Broadridge. I'd love to get your thoughts a little bit about standardization versus choice. You're taking over this whole new QA group, probably a bunch of tools in there that you hadn't seen before that the teams are all using. So tell me a little bit about how you approach that topic of standardization versus choice.
Yeah, that's great. I'll actually go back to about 4 years ago when we kicked off sort of the deployment automation DevOps program here at Broadridge. We basically settled on a standardization approach, but of course with a bit of flexibility, which I'll explain. So, you know, we thought, you know, again, trying to be really sort of smart about it, we thought we'd build sort of a small team of experts within our organization to establish policies around DevOps, establish frameworks, and establish the tooling. We made a commitment to a corporate deployment tool set. Things like Jenkins, Chef, Nexus, Git, Terraform, with centralized administration. And we actually received funding from the CIO to build that out. There were a myriad of tools out there before. Everybody was doing some form of CI and CD, but they were doing it sort of in pockets and silos. There was no consistency. There was no sharing of best practices. And we couldn't even tell what the vendor costs were, and they weren't optimized at all. So what we did is, besides creating that framework, we started this, you know, shift to the left that everybody thought about. And we had our development organizations hire automation engineers and SREs into their teams. So centralized group to sort of consult, advise, policy, but then have the work be done in the development teams. You know, we reached out to our vendor partners to assist in identifying skilled resources, and we're able to move internal resources around, especially with both our India teams, European teams, and our US teams, able to sort of build different organizational structures from that. You know, we made a decision around tools to the point where we wanted to standardize on a set so we can embed it in the organization. What I have found over many years of working is there's too much switching in and out of tools. It takes years to basically build in your tool set. If you only spend a year, you only get 20% of your organization on that tool, and then you switch again, it doesn't work. So I would rather partner with my vendors, you know, sort of have them fill some of these gaps, mature their product, work together as a team, and then look for sort of niche players to fill in some gaps. And we've been doing that with our vendors for a year, and that's a strategy that I've found that works out pretty well.
So flexible standardization, so sort of a platform mentality, so you can economies of scale and all that stuff, but you still are flexible and adaptable to the end user developer.
Correct.
Yeah, wonderful, awesome. Anyone else? Sam, do you have any thoughts on this standardization versus choice in the enterprise? What are you seeing with your mainframe customers? You probably talk with one or two of them.
So I'll share what my customers are saying. And we actually asked this question at a customer council in Brussels in the fall. And I will say that the overwhelming majority of customers were in favor of some amount of standardization. And I think they probably ran the gamut from what Stephen describes as flexible standardization to absolute draconian standardization. What you didn't see, and this is the customers who are sitting in the Fortune 1000. So these are multinational banks, transportation companies, retailers. You didn't see, let's all the teams do the same. And also, we're talking to teams that are generally oriented around enterprise DevOps, specifically that include their mainframe platform system of records and systems interface with a variety of platforms. So the people who are running those systems are looking for They want teams' inputs. They are hugely focused on happy developers. We had a lot of great interactions with DevOps advocates, but you see that because of the scale, when you talk about having 3,000 developers working on various systems that interoperate, they have to put some limits. So flexible standardization, I think that Stephen talked about, is maybe a good way to think about it. You're going to have an SCM that's API enabled and a set of CI tool and a deployment tool. And you think about those core pieces, you don't want to have too much, you don't want to have variety on those parts of the tool chain.
Right. Yep. Have some that standardization, that platform economies of scale piece, for sure. So I also just heard, I was asking earlier, and we're new with the Zoom thing, so we're learning along with you guys, that not everyone can see the comments that are coming into the chat. They can only see my responses or the other responses from the panelists. If you put all the questions into the Q&A, people can see them better. So I would ask that you do that. All right. So who would like
Sam,
to?
I was gonna jump in.
Please.
Yeah, no, just echoing the standardization thing. One of the things we see at the CDF, the Continuous Delivery Foundation, if you take, for example, Salesforce came in and they shared that, they did an audit and found that they had, well over 20 different CI/CD tools. And this was thanks to acquisitions, different tools, different requirements. And they sort of worked out, there was no one size fits all, but they still found, that 20 was far too many for one organization and stifling innovation. So they also, like coming into the open source, they're looking to solve that with other folks in the industry, and with this idea that, they want to embody industry best practices, especially as things evolve towards microservices, but they do need to provide a viable interim path as they get there. And I think that's the bit where the challenge lies in. How do you kind of evolve the systems without turning anything off or doing it in a sudden? So I love Steve's point about it being a multi-year kind of focus.
Yeah. A question to ask the folks who are on the line here is, when's the last time you decommissioned an application? Right. So see if you can remember that, and what did that process look like? It's not easy to do. It doesn't happen very often because who knows what dependencies it has. Awesome. Thank you for that, Tracy. And we have a whole nother slide to just talk about open source, because there are some questions in there. And then there is also a very, very relevant question. I'm trying to find it here from John. How do you stop freedom from turning into technical debt when when folks leave? So that's another shade of color on this question. Let's see, Mitch, do you have any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I would add by saying a couple of things. There certainly is a trend for developers to taking positions, being able to work on the tool set of their preference, and sort of the freedom or the economy of software. That's certainly a trend. On the other hand, you don't want chaos. I think probably one of the best places to look, and this goes to the technical debt question, is there's a cost for using any software, any tool. I think the greater cost is the integration points. And so you're better off looking at it as a tool chain process, because that's where you're going to spend, yes, you're going to spend time upgrading software on the tools, et cetera, but getting it all to work together, keeping it work together, that's usually where those intersection points are. So think of it as, depending on the size of the organization, it could be 2 or 3 or more kind of tool chains that you're standardizing based on the technologies of mainframe, client server, cloud. You're into microservices, cloud native. You're going to have to probably support generations of this. So I would look at it that way.
Multi-generational. Yeah, for sure. And for different teams with the same product, but different versions of it or different whatever. Yeah.
I mean, the best way I found to start an argument is to pick a tool or pick a product, because everybody will tell you what's wrong with it.
That's
and why
right.
It won't work.
That's right. Yeah. Good point.
Human nature.
Awesome. Okay. Sean, thoughts on this? Or Anders?
Sorry, my video was turned off and sound. No, really great topics have been brought up here. I'm going to cease control to Anders to add his point of view.
2 cents. Wonderful.
And
Anders, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, my camera is being a little bit flaky, so it's not that I'm being shy this morning, but I think as I asked in the chat window, when was the last time you decommissioned an entire tool chain or a platform? I think we tend to collect these things over the years, and it's almost as important to decide when to drop and release things. Well, not release, maybe that's the wrong word, decommission things, than it is to pick new tools, right? Because otherwise you are continually piling more and more things onto the truck. And eventually, the truck's not going to be able to pull everything forward, and you're going to get stuck. And the more tools you have, the more tool life cycles you have to manage and deal with upgrades and vulnerabilities and all of those sorts of things. So it's a problem. I mean, and it's a judgment call and a design criteria. As Mitch said, the only, or I'll rephrase it, a little bit slightly. The only thing that's worse than having too few tools is having too many tools. And somebody in the organization has to be paying, I think, at least a little bit of attention to to tool chain evolution and those kinds of things, so you don't get stuck in that sort of way.
Yeah. We were working with a very large bank not too many years ago, and they were saying we can probably containerize 20% of our applications, and this was before serverless had come out. And so they said, we're launching into a 10-year project to containerize 20% of our applications. Okay, very good. And then about 6 months later, serverless came out. And they're like, well, of that 20%, now we're going to slice off another maybe 5%. Maybe we can do that with serverless. And so now you have these, that whole pie that you have just keeps getting cut into smaller and smaller pieces. And you need a bespoke fork or a bespoke spoon for each kind of pie or each kind of piece that you have. So it becomes really difficult to manage. Okay, so there's one more question we could ask about this is, when you're thinking about standardization versus choice, do we even want to talk about this? I think this is too obvious, but does that help you attract or retain talent? Does having more flexibility and freedom help you retain talent and get more talent? I don't know that we need to talk a whole lot about it because we only have 30 minutes left. Seems like the answer to that's going to be yes. Would everyone sort of agree with that? Head nods? Yeah. Choice.
I'll give you a contrarian.
Good.
Yeah. So if you focus on only attracting engineers who want to work, or talent, even beyond just engineers, who only want to work on the most avant-garde technology or a particular technology suite, you're inevitably going to find people who care more about themselves than about the firm or about customers. What you want are people who look at the tool and any tool that's in front of them as a means to an end, as a means to solve important problems for the firm and for customers. And if that's not their focus, they're probably not the best people to employ, especially in an agile development effort where you want them to be empathetic and running towards problems and really deeply understanding what you're trying to accomplish as a business. And anytime, I always get alarm bells when I talk to anybody in an interview process that is focused on particular technologies and would not be willing to look at other technologies as long as those are the ones that are currently serving the best needs of the firm and customers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love that you take a contrarian view, because that's what this whole thing's about. Is I don't want to be stuck in the way that I'm always thinking about things. This is a safe space for people to tell me that I'm full of it, which is fantastic because I don't know everything. Awesome. Okay, next slide, please. Let's talk about, we've talked a little bit about, the challenges of enterprise DevOps, but let's just back up a second. And what's your definition of enterprise DevOps? How would you sort of define what is DevOps versus enterprise DevOps? And everyone's giving me the side eye here. So I think that there's some good thinking going on. Who would like to start?
I'm happy to jump in, Sam.
All right, Mitch, let's go. You're on the hot seat.
Most organizations usually start out, unless they're a startup company, but most larger organizations usually start out with some pilot projects or groups that are splintered off. Maybe they're in IT, maybe they're not. At some point, you really reach a critical mass where you say, is this how we're going to develop software, create software now? Especially if you tie creation of software to a digital transformation strategy tied to business strategies, et cetera, because now you're really relying on the ability to deliver software. So I consider enterprise DevOps is when the organization is all working on embracing or adopting DevOps in some way, in some capacity. Some parts of the organization, it's going to be a stretch to get started. Others might go a little faster by getting involved with the DevOps dojo. Others may be self-propelled because they've hired folks that know how to do this. But I think the overall message is enterprise DevOps is when you as an organization are saying, this is something of an approach we think can benefit us and we're going to adopt it in a way that makes sense for us.
All right. Any contrarian views or other definitions?
I'll jump in, it's Steve.
Great.
So we took a top-down approach to DevOps when we kicked this off, like I said, via the centralization and how we organized. I actually pulled a bullet out from one of the earlier presentations so we actually were asked many times, what is enterprise DevOps at Broadridge? So I actually want to read it. So we wrote back, I guess about 4 years ago, enterprise DevOps is a combination of a strategic, tactical, and cultural approach to driving innovation, risk reduction, and efficiency in both the software development lifecycle and the infrastructure production support organizations. So we started that with that sort of theme, that culture, that mission back then. And, we were sort of asked by senior management, run this like a program. Let's not go bottom up. The bottom up has happened in the previous 5 years in terms of those silos. Let's try to bring it together. And then in a little bit, I can sort of explain sort of our approach in a little more detail if you guys like.
Sounds like a good intro to your next book, Stephen.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
I got several books in my head. None of them written yet, but I got several in my head.
Well, go for it.
Yeah, Jerry was saying the outcomes is what people should focus on.
Right.
And thinking, and if you're thinking that way, then you're looking more strategically. But I like that you call out tactically, strategically, I think it was strategically, and culturally.
Correct.
Those are the cultural aspect. I know a lot of times these conversations devolve into culture only. Tools matter, but culture is certainly very important, and having the ability to be like this. We're having some issues with the chat and things and trying to figure out how the Q&A thing works. We're learning. And if you're not learning, then you're standing still. And so it's okay to be learning. Gene Kim has a fantastic quote that he says, the improvement of the quality of the daily work is more important than the quality of the daily work. So no matter where you're starting, as long as you're getting better every day, it's a good thing. As far as enterprise DevOps, Anders or Sean, Tracy, comments on this topic?
Yeah, nothing much to add. Just I think it's once the stakeholders start going up and you've got more legacy systems to build, it's just a different scale and different level of proposition than say smaller, medium companies have to deal with.
Right. John asked a pretty good question in the chat here, which I think is related to this, and I'll put it out here. And Gorang seems to think it's a great question. Should all apps use DevOps? Should we try and DevOps everything? Enterprise DevOps, does that mean force feeding DevOps on everything? Let's see, Sam, what are your thoughts on that?
So definitely it's early days. I think when you see adoption of DevOps into large enterprise, it is moving from early adopters to early majority. If you kind of have been going to say the DevOps world, DevOps enterprise, some of these large events that focus on, again, the kind of the Fortune 1000 customers, you could see that there were a very small number of customers telling the story, but that is starting to expand. And it is through those testimonials that you move from sort of early adopters who are getting a competitive advantage to more and more customers. And the early majority tend to look for patterns that they can follow. They go to the the marathon man question. Is it safe? Can I do this? Will I be able to survive an encounter with my auditors, with my, with the people who have heretofore controlled budgets? And now that they see that there's some patterns out there that can be followed, more and more are moving. And it comes down to scale. And do you want to be an agile business? Do you want to improve quality, velocity, and efficiency at scale? And I think, Mitch and Stephen both touched on that very well.
Yeah. Yeah, that scale question is definitely there. Anyone else have any comments on that?
Should we say I agree with Sam, since he agreed with Stephen and me, so I'm on board with him.
Right.
Yeah. DevOps, all the things.
Yeah. So John's putting it back out there. So what about packaged apps like a accounting app? Should you try and DevOps that? Salesforce, you want DevOps that? Yeah.
Well, you can automate the deployment, you can automate the configs, you can automate the support processes around that. So, we equate, how we started, we equated DevOps with deployment first, deployment automation first, then deployment automation, operational automation. And, we're very metrical, if I can make up that word, at Broadridge. So we like to track the outcomes and the value of these things. So we're always driving automation exercises across the firm, in technology and in the business. So wherever you can automate and take out a manual process and take out an error or potential error, you do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree with that. Rarely are major applications truly standalone. You're always integrating with multiple, enterprise systems, also doing development around it, customization, things like that. All of those are potential for a DevOps process.
Awesome. All right. We got a couple of questions in the hopper here. One from Riza. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name incorrectly. But question for you, Tracy. What would be your advice in dealing with organizational resistance in embracing open source community engagement, or just open source in general? We can maybe abstract that question a bit more.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I think the first thing to appreciate today is that, open source has come a long way, and it's not the taboo it was 20 years ago. I mean, even Microsoft have turned around and said, we were wrong. Research shows, at least 52% of companies have structured open source strategies or programs. Companies like Capital One, Bosch, Toyota. So the first thing I'd say is, look at the competitors. If your competitors are embracing open source, then your company needs to. And secondly, I think individuals have always been the biggest change agents for things like this. So I would say, don't underestimate the effect you can have in kind of bringing open source to your company. First, by highlighting how everybody uses it. And secondly, it's usually, what do we do next? How do we practically go about doing things? And I'd say just, champion the cause and look at some of the case studies we have on CD Foundation. And I think it's just going to become more and more a thing that if you can't leverage open source, then it just slows you down.
So I'm going to interrupt Tracy, and I'm going to ask the folks who are playing along at home or wherever you happen to be playing along from, how does open source play in your current DevOps scenario? Are you using open source operating systems, open source tooling, open source libraries? How are you using open source in your DevOps application development function? Let us know. Some folks saying that they're using Jenkins. That's not surprising. That's not surprising. A lot of folks saying that a lot of open source in their tool chain, which isn't surprising also. So anyone else have thoughts about sort of using open source? There was sort of a comment on this earlier. I'll bring that back up, is how do you keep tooling that people want? And I'm not going to say open source is any better or worse than anything else, but unsupported software, how do you keep that from becoming, technical debt or legacy debt in your application stack? So Tracy, I'm going to point that back to you and see what your thoughts are there.
Sam, if I could jump in.
Sure.
Open source, and to Tracy's point, open source is different than it was even 10 years ago. It's no longer the the lone wolf's project, attracting other wolves to work on, their software, to use that metaphor. Open source is a huge, huge source of innovation, and you're really, I think, losing out by cutting off and believing it's because it's quote unquote not supported. Because open source is more than just software. It's also a business model. You all are a perfect example. Take Kubernetes with Google, another business model built around open source. So it isn't always, most of the time, the major open source software projects aren't just a couple of people. There's an ecosystem around it as it gets mature, gets adopted, gets used. And I would enhance what Tracy said by saying, if your competitors are using it, I would venture to guess 100% of the time they are using it. So you're behind the curve if you're not, at least the innovation curve.
Yeah, it's hard to compete with an entire cloud of innovation.
It is.
Yeah, for sure. Stephen or Samuel, you guys are using some open source stuff in your tool chains, or you're seeing customers using it, Samuel?
Absolutely. And I think as long as you have the appropriate governance processes, we use open source in development, and we also do things like black duck scans to make sure that, we're not incorporating, licenses that provide a governance model that we're not comfortable with or that isn't approved. So you just have to, I think as Mitch said, you have to manage this like any other part of the business. You can't just allow it to happen.
Right.
It can be advantageous to you and to your customers. You just have to put the appropriate amount of work into making it so.
Yeah, we have a pretty strong information security division. Obviously, we support most of the financial institutions around the world. So when it comes to open source, we have a whole group of folks who study that and look at that. We scan those things, we make decisions. We even make decisions on what we want to put what stuff we want to put out, in open source, both internally and externally. So it's a focus here, but we're sort of pretty tight here because of, we treat ourselves like a financial institution.
Because you are? Yeah, that's a good.
Now we're everybody's back office, so that's why.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's good that you treat yourself as such. Let's see. So yeah, so great comments from the folks in the chat. A lot of folks are using open source. Some issues about licensing issues being a pain in the what. But yeah, people want to take advantage of all that innovation that's occurring. So that's fantastic. So there was a question earlier from Alan and Stephen. This one I think I'm going to direct towards you. And the question is, quality assurance is increasingly important as we move towards faster and more frequent releases. His comment is really more about production data. And he recently read that generating and or massaging production or using spreadsheets can take up to 40% of the time of testing. So what are the ways that people use to fully automate the process of generating test data? Generating test data for financial applications has got to be pretty tricky. Knight Capital, right? They went out of business because they couldn't figure out how to keep the test data from getting into production. So having real life looking production data to test systems is important. So Stephen, do you have any thoughts on that? What are you guys doing to try and make that?
Yeah, so it's a great question because I'm literally in the middle of that conversation and those decisions as we speak, since I took over this program literally about 7 weeks ago. So, obviously the challenge there is you have multiple environments to build and test between dev and QA, UAT, and prod. On the distributed and cloud side, you have multiple mainframe environments, plus we have a set of client test environments. And you have data flying around between vendor and partner. You have real-time data coming in from the street. You have DTC data, you have participant data, you have all sorts of stuff. So we're still figuring that out. Obviously, in the lower environments, there are harnesses and simulation that people will build. The dev teams and the QA teams work together, and we'll use some basic tooling to generate files and generate API calls. As we move up the stack, we'll take in data, we'll mask all the PII information, and then we'll fan it out to all of the upper environments for use. We're doing this big conversion So I guess every 8 weeks, there's a refresh of all this data that goes through that obfuscation and masking process as well. But it's a challenge when you're trying to test all of this stuff, and some teams are, in upper, some are in lower, some are trying to test on real data. So there's no one answer, but we're using different combinations of different tools, using Informatica, some homegrown stuff, and the dev teams are building, in the lower environments, their own data solutions. But the key is you have to get, I'll call it a data czar or a data management, test data management expert to run that and drive that for you. You have to go central and manage that down, or else it'll be a free-for-all.
Nice. All right, Stephen, that's good. Anyone else have comments on this? Testing?
I just love the data czar.
Yeah, somebody needs to own that. And when you start to think about different versions of different applications or advanced versions of applications where you don't actually have data that matches that new schema yet, and you have to invent data, yeah, it's challenging.
Very much so.
Just add, treat it as another artifact or asset, put it under source control management or some kind of management process. And I actually can't imagine, Stephen, for you when you're a product company, the variations on test data that you're trying to collect and assemble to represent what your customers do. That multiplies the problem.
Yeah, so, there's hundreds of clients in our test environments at any time of the day, testing out their version of code that they're integrating with us. You can't even build the linear programming model that comes up with all these permutations and what goes on here.
I can't imagine.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Anyone else want to respond to that? If not, we can move on to another. Jerry is out there. He's just cranking on so many great observations. He's got a great woodworking analogy that I want to read out for people about tooling. He does woodworking, and selecting the best tool for the job is always key. Just because a tool will do the job doesn't mean it is the best tool for the job. And so again, standardizing and saying, well, this thing has an edge on it, I can use it to cut stuff. Well, scissors and an axe, they serve different purpose. They both are sharp, but they're both different purpose. So I think that's a fantastic statement. Let's see. Next slide, please. The role of open source. I think we covered this one already, which is good. We talk a little bit about making sure that the teams that are using the technology are using that correctly. How are you doing that? How are you working with your teams to try and educate them or try and make sure that they go through the right legal things? It's another comment that someone brought up earlier, which was engineers need to get into the mindset of trying to build quality in and thinking about some of these things instead of just going and grabbing the library. Is there education programs that you're putting in place at your companies to help people understand? You could be flexible and grab stuff, but you got to just be governed. What does that look like? Stephen or Sam?
So you have to have some internal review, both engineering and legal, of code bases that you're bringing in. So the open source license has to be one that is either explicitly approved for use in your build cycle or gets is subject to a new approval and review. And the code base itself has to, be acceptable in terms of its health. So, the engineering organization needs to be comfortable with what they're being proposed to consume. And typically you also have to have a legal review of the licensing, and you have to have automated procedures to make sure that then that compliance from a licensing perspective is maintained going forward.
Interesting. Okay, very good. And there's another question that came in from Senthil Kumar. And maybe Tracy, this would be something for you to cover, is what does testing look like in an open source community? I think Anders has already given a bit of an answer, but I'm sure you have some more color.
Yes, I was just typing up a response, but yeah, it does vary from project to project. And as Anders points out, it's not like open source is one thing and commercial is different. So you've got a different grading. one thing, like in particular with the Continuous Delivery Foundation, we're looking to elevate the level of quality, both in terms of security and QA. And the way we do this by coming together as a community and requiring our projects to meet, for instance, is the core infrastructure initiative, where you have to sort of self-certify your security processes, your QA processes. And then also for projects to graduate, we carry out security audits. We have a third-party company come in. And the whole idea is to give confidence to enterprises that this is really kind of best of breed open source software, and they can have rest assured that everything's being done to make sure it meets highest quality standards. So I say open source at that level is in some ways, I think, very, very high quality.
And Anders mentioned, and Anders, I'd love to have you actually talk a little bit more about it, is you can tell by inspection how good the automated tests are. Do folks actually go in and do that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just for those folks that weren't reading along in the chat, I was just kind of making the point that, the quality approaches that various open source projects take vary greatly, just the same as they do for closed source. As far as I'm concerned, there's really not that much difference. Some suck and some are great. The big difference, I think, is you can read the code. You can go in and look at the test suites. Some open source projects even have, they display code coverage. They display, lots of metrics and information around that. So the kind of the information sharing potential is there to a much greater degree than there is with closed source. You really have no idea what approaches are being taken there. So from my perspective, you have a huge leg up on the knowledge aspect of how well something is being tested and what level of automation is being used and what the coverages are and those sorts of things, which you don't really have that for closed source in any meaningful way as far as I can tell. So that's sort of +1 in the open source column there.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And I know, Sam, you guys do quite a bit of work with CompuWare with open source tooling from Jenkins to make sure that everything works well for people to be able to use standard tooling to just push stuff right into some pretty tight, non-open systems, right?
And Jenkins absolutely is one of the common denominators we see with people who are trying to do enterprise DevOps with mainframes. While there's other solutions, I would say that 9 out of 10 conversations start with Jenkins. And of the remaining conversations, often what you find as you unpack them is they haven't actually done anything yet. And so we have a number of Jenkins plugins for exactly that reason that, go, right into the mainframe. We do the heavy lifting and then make that, open up that mainframe black box. And Jenkins is a perfect vehicle for doing that.
Yeah. And you guys we had a CD Connect event last week where you guys demonstrated, where CompuWare demonstrated using that tooling to push COBOL code directly into the mainframe. And we had folks doing it live on the day. So it was really exciting workshop that we held last week for practitioners. If folks are interested in looking at that, you can go back and check that out as well. All right. Let's see. Another question here about APIs and DevOps and APIs. People's thoughts here about APIs, their role in DevOps, and how do you standardize on those APIs versus letting people sort of make up their own interface. I think Amazon talked a lot about this culturally. They said there will only be APIs that people can use between teams. There's no public APIs. It can't be a private API. And so thoughts on that. And I think Tracy that brought up the thing about working with partners and third-party folks, having those clear SLAs and those clear APIs defined. How does that help? Anyone have a thought on that? Anders or Sean or Mitch? Stephen?
I was just going to jump in. Certainly is something to look to your senior software architects, folks that have been down this path of developing APIs before kind of learned the hard lessons. I think what you mentioned, Sam, that AWS uses, I've seen teams use a couple of approaches. One is everything is public, so there are no private APIs. There's also usually some decision about the supportability of generations of versions of APIs. How far back are you going to support those? Because then you get technical debt to keep them upgraded. The other is the trend in software is to build everything based on APIs, so that the code itself, however it's presented or interacts with other parts of the application, whether it be in a mobile or a web interface or some other back-end process, it's all through APIs. There's no kind of inter-process communications through other mechanisms. So it's certainly the trend to move that way. And I think there's getting a much better knowledge base of experience for people doing it that way too.
Yeah, so a good question for the group while we're having this discussion is how many of you are thinking about APIs and collaborating, getting teams to communicate via APIs as part of your DevOps journey, your transformation?
Yeah, hey, Sam, the entire design of this project that I just got assigned to do the QA work is all about interacting with other financial services companies in the wealth management space. And the entire design is based on an API set, sort of an integration service layer where that's the place that we talk together.
Right.
So we've taken that to heart here in Broadridge. And, you know, we're looking to sort of go from a product oriented, hey, you buy this application and we have this long onboarding process, to here's a set of APIs that you can now connect to, just like in AWS, and you can start building your own integration on your side a lot faster than trying to bring up these applications and be very boxed into what the offering is. You know, it minimizes future application changes on our side and gets the client onboarded a lot faster and more of an agile mentality. So I think DevOps will have to figure out how to support that, and the testing programs will have to figure out how to support that as well.
Yep.
Yeah. And if I can add as
Please.
well, in the open source community, CDF, we're doing it at scale. We have an interoperability group, and that's looking at how do we have common APIs across different tools, you know, with the view that you can have this portability across tools. So what if we could define standard APIs around what a deployment means, and then have the same thing apply to whether it's Spinnaker or Jenkins X, or as you have new things come along like progressive delivery, why not standardize the API so you get better working of tools together and more innovation. So we're looking at a range of things there, from kind of events, cloud events, metadata for testing, and just trying to see which makes sense to tackle as a group and come up with some common APIs.
Very good. I'd seen a question from Pamela earlier that I wanted to circle back to, and I'm trying to find it. So I apologize.
And while you're finding that, I guess I'll add one last comment on this. You know, for us, open source was critically important to our teams to adapt and adopt as they see fit to do the job that they needed to do. Tying together the open source with API, for us, we kind of had not a hard and fast rule, but at least a qualification or criteria of evaluation was always that would that open source product or tool that we're bringing in, would it have the appropriate APIs to plug into our infrastructure around CI/CD release orchestration? Does it provide you with some level of API where you can understand what the objects are within the tool? You know, what is the definition of a process? Can you interact with it? Can you start or stop or create or do some basic functions with it? So long as it was pluggable into our CI/CD, which we had standardized on Jenkins, then it was an easier way for us to adopt it. We were much more, I should say, open arms about taking in open source to do the job there. But if it was completely siloed, there would be no way we can plug it in. We can't get it to see it inside of our value stream. in the future, if we can't see it within the CD solution, if we can't somehow manage to plug it in with our backbone, then we would be less inclined to bring it in. So I think API is a critical component and evaluation factor as you plug it into your software delivery backbone. At least that's how we saw it on our end.
Lovely. Any other thoughts on this, or we'll move to the next slide? We're 5 minutes from the end of our session, so we sort of we're gonna wrap it up here pretty quick. We've talked about mainframes and microservices already. See how awesome the questions from the audience are. I told you folks, we did a prep call for those of you who are listening in the audience here. We did a prep call and we basically said, here's some prompts that we might get to, but likely the questions from the audience, the conversation with the audience is going to keep us going, which you did not disappoint. So good job to you all. If you could go to the next step, the next slide, Sean, this is your favorite slide, the droids versus the Jedis. So I think you wanted to sort of talk a little bit about this, talk over this, and then we'll go to the next slide, which is a wrap up and a call to action for folks.
Yeah, I love this. This wasn't, by the way, not necessarily my creation, but the creation of the teams. And it was this whole idea of droids with tricks up their sleeve that are 1, 2, or 3, and they look the same, they feel the same, they do the things, they do the same way, and so on and so forth. Whether you put that army of droids up against a few highly skilled, Jedi warriors with their, tool of choice, or their lightsaber with different colors and different skills, you put them up against each other, and who wins? And predictably, in the Star Wars universe, the Jedis will win. In the more developer and ops and software delivery world, who are the Jedis there? And we used to draw that parallel that those Jedis were those with the most focus and flow, and they were almost always the ones who had their sweet setup, and they were almost always innovating faster and having far more enjoyment from their work, and sort of acted as naturally the leaders. And so we wanted what? Do we want an army of droids, or do we want an army of a few really great Jedis? And we used to joke around and say we want Jedis. That's the positive power, right? That's the light. So that's how we kind of thought about this slide here that we put together. It was meant as a little bit of a joke back in the days, but that was the concept behind it. Choice and focus is critical.
Very nice. Very nice. Yes. Next slide, please. We're gonna close this out with 2 asks. So there's a link already in your Q&A area. Thank you, Kristen, for posting it. While we still have you, please pull up a short survey and fill it out. We want your feedback. We're trying to make this collaborative and interactive. It's our first time playing around with the Zoom platform, so I think it's pretty cool. We definitely appreciate everybody participating in today's presentation. So give us some feedback. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't like. Also, if you've ever heard of DevOps World, Jenkins World, DevOps World this year is going to be virtual. And we are adding a leadership track to the festivities. So in addition to having the best content for practitioners and folks, open source folks who want to get involved there, we're creating with Accelerated Strategies. Mitch and team are going to be chairing the programming for the Software Delivery Leadership Forum track at DevOps World, and that's coming up in the second half of the year here. If you're interested in speaking, if you have a topic that you care about, that you'd like to submit for our call for papers, it's actually been extended because we changed it from a live on-site physical event to a virtual event for obvious reasons. So if you are interested in speaking, please submit. The link to the submittal is right there. Also, if you're interested in the panel, so there's one thing that we have in common, all the people who are on this panel right now speaking, is that we're all learning new things, and we may know 1 or 2 things, but we're open to learning more. If you are the same kind of person and you have an opinion about software delivery and you'd be interested in joining us potentially as a panelist, raise your hand and let us know. You can send an email to me. I'm cloudbees.com. You can send an email to me for now until we get an alias set up for us to take things, because we're really, really interested in hearing not what a select group of people that we know of have to say about this, but what the community has to say. And so my ask to all of you is to raise your hand or find people who would do the same, so that we can get a broader cross-section of people in these conversations. With that, I want to thank everybody in the audience for joining. I especially want to thank our panelists, Stephen, Samuel, Mitch, Tracy. Thank you folks for joining. Sean, thank you so much for the great presentation. And Anders, I'm sorry that your camera wasn't working, but we'll see you next time. We're actually rerunning this exact same program in 2 days on the 28th. Again, I mentioned it's at 2 o'clock Central European time, 2 or 2:30, I'm not sure which one. But if you're over there and you'd like to watch this or add your color to that conversation, we would love to have you there as well. Thank you, everybody. Have a fantastic Tuesday, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right.